Hello, everyone, and welcome to Right Wing Rising. Please be sure to like this video down below before you are finished watching, and subscribe to the channel if you are new. In today's installment of my 240 to Win series, we're going to be focusing on the state of New Jersey. It's a fascinating state politically that has been the subject of more focus in the last 4 years than it has gotten in a long time. And that is due to the fact that it has gotten closer, much closer overall, than it has been for most of the 2000s. Despite being considered an uncompetitive race that Democrats would easily win, the 2021 governor election here was nearly a shocking upset for Republicans, with their nominee, Jack Ciattarelli, coming within 3 points of victory. Incumbent Governor Phil Murphy barely survived re-election to a second term, as the GOP flipped much of South Jersey, including Atlantic City. Republicans also made gains in both chambers of the state legislature, including a no-name Republican with practically no funding taking down the Democrat Senate president in a massive upset. And such an unusual story in politics that it made national headlines. The fact that a random conservative truck driver took down one of the most powerful political figures in the state of New Jersey. The New Jersey Republican Party looked to continue their positive momentum when the incumbent three-term Democrat Senator Bob Menendez was indicted on federal corruption charges in 2023, and since many in his party decided to throw him under the bus and not stand with him, including practically all of his fellow Democrat senators, he decided to retaliate for their perceived disloyalty to him and run as an independent in the Senate election taking place this fall. This news sent Republicans in the state into celebration mode, seeing an opportunity to actually have a chance at a seat that normally goes heavily Democrat. Even when Bob Menendez was running for a third term in 2018, and even before he was indicted back then, he still had many scandals and skeletons in his closet, he still won by over 10 points. Conversely, Democrats were concerned that Bob Menendez would still get enough Democrat voters to support him, enough to split the liberal vote and give Republicans a solid chance at victory. Considering this, more focus than normal was put on the GOP primary, where the less conservative option unfortunately beat out the candidate that was backed by Trump. This result was concerning for some Republican pundits, as the GOP would need all Republican voters to show up and vote to have a chance at victory. So the fact that a much less conservative, more moderate Republican, heck, I'd even go so far to call him a liberal Republican, he doesn't even support some of Trump's key policies, such as on immigration, which is a huge issue to most Republican voters this time. So this is a nominee that a lot of conservatives might hesitate to get out and vote for enthusiastically. So Republicans shot themselves in the foot with their choice of nominee, halting some of the momentum they had here at giving themselves a fighting chance to pull off a big upset in this election. To be fair, the GOP nominee here has raised a lot of money, having millions of dollars to spend in his campaign, which helps him to keep up competitively in campaigning against Andy Kim, the current congressman from the 3rd District, who is the Democrat nominee in this race. On top of Republican voters selecting a weak choice on policy to be their nominee and go up against Andy Kim, Bob Menendez was convicted on federal corruption charges brought against him this summer, and he dropped out, making Democrats breathe a sigh of relief and bringing Republicans' chances of winning this race back down to be basically non-existent. Once more, giving Democrats a clear path to victory to hold on to this Senate seat, although the polling has still been close, showing the largest lead for Kim to be only 9 points. And the first poll in August, after Menendez had dropped out, showed Kim only leading GOP nominee Curtis Bashaw by a 38-33 margin, with 20% undecided. So if Bashaw is able to attract a large percentage of those undecided voters, he could still very well be competitive here. With no major third party in this election, look for Democrats to fairly easily win, since Republicans have fundraised much better here than in past years, and especially considering that there's no incumbent running and there's been a lot of turmoil for Democrats in this state this year throughout the nominating process for this Senate seat. Besides for the Senate race taking place in New Jersey, and the elections for the state legislature take place in non-midterm or presidential years, so nothing to analyze there either. Instead, there are several competitive and interesting House races taking place in New Jersey. First, in the 5th Congressional District, four-term incumbent Josh Gottheimer is running for re-election after only winning by 10 points in this Northern Jersey district. However, despite a reasonably close race last time in the midterms, he has an insane amount of cash, with almost $20 million to spend, and his Republican challenger has only about $50,000. Money isn't everything, but it helps run a great campaign and get name recognition out there, which he already has as the incumbent, an advantage that his Republican opponent does not have. Funding does matter less in presidential years, as turnout is already higher, but all things considered, I expect Gottheimer to be re-elected once again, probably closer to 15 points, rather than the 10-point margin he won by in 2022, because he is in much stronger shape to do so this time around. In the 6th Congressional District, this is a seat that actually got a few points bluer following redistricting in New Jersey, but still swung considerably to the right in 2022. The incumbent, Frank Pallone, a career politician who has held this seat for over 30 years, won by 16 points in the midterms, which is still a solid victory, but a steep drop-off from his normal electoral wins of over 20 points. This is another race where the Republican nominee is severely underfunded, barely has around $10,000 to spend versus Pallone's roughly $3 million. So I expect Pallone to once again be victorious in this district, but look for it to be closer to 15 points rather than a 20-point victory. But if Trump at the top of the ticket helps out down ballot to a significant degree, you could see Pallone's margin of victory shrink to below 15 points here, which would be pretty interesting for the future. In the 11th district, Mikey Sherrill won by 19 points in 2022 in this very urbanized House seat, but Biden actually did a couple points worse in 2020 than the Democrats did in the midterms, meaning that Republicans performed vastly better here when Trump was at the top of the ticket. So combine that with any improvement Trump makes in New Jersey, it should be much closer and get within 10 to 15 points, or even less than 10, on a good night if Republicans turn out at a high enough rate. Plus, the GOP nominee here also has actual funding to run a real campaign. Those three races are the likely Democrat seats. Now we move on to the four most competitive House races of the cycle. The 2nd Congressional District features a Republican incumbent, Jeff Van Drew, that is a former Democrat who switched parties in 2019 and has actually had a very solid track record as a House Republican ever since. Winning election to a first term as a Democrat in 2018, he turned around and won re-election as a Republican by 5.5 points in 2020, and then was victorious by a whopping 59 to 40 margin against his Democrat opponent in the midterms, winning every county in his South Jersey seat, but this is still a district that Trump only won by 5 points. So it's likely that Van Drew's victory was inflated due to it being a midterm year, and it will get closer once again this fall, so it is still somewhere Republicans need to defend and make sure they hold it. The Democrat nominee is Joe Salerno, who is a very well-funded challenger, and the only poll of this election showed Van Drew up by just 8 points and only being at 50% of the vote in that poll. I still expect Jeff Van Drew to hold on as the incumbent with $1 million left to still spend down the stretch of this campaign, and it still is a Trump seat at the end of the day despite being a narrow one. So while it is all but certain to be closer in a presidential year than it was in the midterms, Trump being at the top of the ticket isn't something that is going to hurt Van Drew in the way of costing him the election. In fact, it will help him, considering that Van Drew has a much stronger challenger this time around than 2 years ago. In the 3rd Congressional District, this is the current Congress seat of Andy Kim, the Senate nominee for Democrats, so it's now an open seat which gives Republicans more of a chance. Andy Kim won it by less than 8 points in 2020. And even though it did get more blue in the midterms, voting for Kim by 12, it will almost certainly get closer with him not being on the ballot as the incumbent and it being a presidential year. Additionally, the Republican nominee here actually has more money to spend ahead of Election Day than the Democrat nominee does, which is really an unusual sight. So given recent trends in New Jersey, if any seat surprisingly flips red this cycle, this could really be a sleeper flip, especially if Trump does well across the state. The biggest battleground of all the House races in New Jersey can be found in the 7th District, a seat that flipped into Republican hands last election, with Tom Keene winning a rematch against then-incumbent Tom Malinowski. Republican Tom Keene lost by 5,000 votes and a little over 1 point in a razor-thin election in 2020, but then flipped the script in round 2 and won by 9,000 votes and 3 points in 2022 after the seat became redder following redistricting. It voted for Biden by just 4 points in 2020, but Republicans have improved in Northwest New Jersey since then, so it's quite possible Trump improves here and maybe even wins the district narrowly, all of which would help Keene cross the finish line. He got 10,000 more votes than the Democrats in the primary and is outraising and outspending his opponent by a 2-1 margin. But the Democrat nominee is still well-funded for a challenger. This is going to be one of the closest House races in the country, and one that the GOP must hold on to maintain their majority, and I think they are favored to do so. Tom Keene led a poll of the district by 8 points that was conducted last year, and in 2 recent polls, he led each of them by 2 points, one of them being a Democrat internal, which is definitely a good sign for him and a bad sign for the Democrats. Most election analysis outlets have this race listed as a toss-up that is leaning slightly toward Republicans, and at the end of the day, I expect Keene to win by a margin of somewhere between 2 to 4 points, similar to how he did in 2022. Finally, the last House race of note in New Jersey can be found in the 9th District. The incumbent of nearly 30 years, Bill Pascrell, won election to another term in 2022 by only 11 points, after normally winning in past elections by at least 30 points or more. So it was a huge shift to the right. The incumbent passed away earlier this summer, which threw the state of this election into disarray for Democrats, who had to choose a new nominee at the last second, since the primary had already taken place and the incumbent was renominated. Given that it is an open seat and the Democrat nominee does not have much time before the election to mount and run a campaign, gain name recognition with voters, and fundraise, whereas the GOP nominee this time was also the nominee in the last 2 elections, so voters are very familiar with him, and he got nearly 44% against the longtime incumbent. I think he can do at least a little bit better than that against a Democrat candidate that voters are a lot less familiar with. I expect this race to be within 10 points, and just like the 3rd District, this could be another surprising possible upset or unexpectedly close election to the Republicans' benefit. Last, but certainly not least, we have to talk about the main event, that being the presidential showdown in the state of New Jersey, a state that has not voted red at the presidential level since 1988, voting for Bill Clinton both times It went to Al Gore in 2000 by a landslide margin of 16 points, swung back to the right to vote for Kerry against Bush by just a little less than 7 points, but supported Obama heavily by margins of 15.5 and 18 points in 2008 and 2012, respectively. Trump then came onto the scene in 2016 and cut the Democrats' victory down to 14 points against Hillary, even flipping 2 South Jersey counties red, those being Salem and Gloucester. And it only got slightly more Democrat 4 years later, voting for Biden by 16 points in 2020, meaning that it trended to the right, even if barely. Because the nation moved left by 2.5 points, but New Jersey only moved left by 2, meaning it trended a half point to the right, which seems minuscule and insignificant, but the fact that it did not follow most Democrat states and swing massively toward the left in favor of Biden is definitely significant, and hinted at the state moving more Republican over the last 4 years. As such, it is very realistic for Trump to actually make the state only a 10 to 12 point win for Harris, if not even within 10 points. He had a massive rally in New Jersey earlier this year. Tens of thousands of people showed up, and I believe he's going to be having another rally in the state before Election Day, which will only help turn out for Republicans in the state, and he was actually leading in several polls here before Biden dropped out, so it's very possible that it could trend significantly to the right. There has been only one poll of this race since Harris became the nominee, with her leading 56 to 44 in that poll, which is a 12-point lead, pretty in line with what I just said would be realistic to predict for Republicans on a good night. And the polling firm that conducted that poll is pretty liberal-leaning, so there's even a chance it's underestimating Donald Trump in the state, and it could be within 10. But even the fact that he's at 44% in New Jersey is astounding, because he could not get over 40% in any poll. Forget just this polling firm, any poll that took a sampling in New Jersey ahead of 2020 could not get Trump above 40 points. The fact that he's at 44 in a liberal-leaning poll, only down by 12 when he lost it by 16 in 2020, is absolutely huge for his campaign and Republicans' chances up and down the ballot here this fall and into the future. And his path to doing this is flipping back Gloucester and Morris counties that Biden won that voted for Trump in 2016, and turning Atlantic and Cumberland counties, the other parts of South Jersey, into Trump counties, like other Republicans have done in the elections that have taken place in New Jersey since 2020, along with the normal strategy of maxing out the vote share in the rural areas that are already friendly to Trump and went to him the past 2 times, and improving in the suburban and urban regions, cutting into Harris's vote share in those places, which is likely to happen. For years, we saw New Jersey trend to the left due to it being a highly urban, affluent state with an ethnically diverse population, all of which are favorable demographics to the Democrats. Furthermore, it's a densely populated state with few rural areas where less than 10% of the population lives. The state is barely majority white, and manufacturing is not a large segment of the economy. Despite all of this, the state has had a noticeable shift towards the GOP in the last 4 years under the Biden administration. Looking closer at the demographics, the state is 2/3 Christian, half of which are Catholics, and nearly 50% of the state is working class. It might not be a manufacturing hub, but the working class population is still very large, which is important. And New Jersey Republicans have focused on local issues to gain support, such as high taxes, inflation, high crime rates, the border crisis, and deeply unpopular and rampantly liberal education policies relating to curriculum and what material is actually being taught in the school systems. Combined with the unpopularity of the Biden-Harris administration, this strategy has translated to electoral improvement in the suburbs and cities by adding new voters and garnering newfound grassroots support energy, and enthusiasm, especially when it comes to Republican stances on issues like education, resulting in Republican voters having higher turnout all across the state, especially in red areas. Also thanks to backlash against Democrat COVID policies in 2020 and 2021, which a lot of voters have not forgotten about. Trump made the initial improvement for Republicans in the state from the Obama years, making inroads in South Jersey, and the New Jersey GOP, to their credit, has taken up the mantle and run with it to make further gains in the state by honing their message on issues that voters care about and that affect them in their daily lives. Issues like the economy and immigration that are the bread and butter issues of Trump's campaign and messaging. Given this, and the fact that Trump started the ball rolling for Republicans to have a brighter future and to be more competitive, look for him to improve from his past performance and keep the state of New Jersey trending to the right.